Hi, everyone. Mike Malatesta here, and welcome back to the How Did Happen podcast. On this podcast, I dig in deep with every guest to explore the roots of their success, to discover not just how it happened, but why it matters. My mission is to find and share stories that inspire, activate, and maximize the greatness in you. Today's episode of the How Did Happen podcast is part 1 with Brett Johnson, the godfather of internet crime. Because this was such a fascinating conversation and went longer than most, we're sharing it with you in 2 parts, and you won't want to miss either. In part 1, we talk about what it's like to grow up with a mom who's a fraudster and maybe a sociopath too. How Brett learned to steal food with his younger sister before he was 10 years old, and meeting the first decent human being in his life at age 16.
Cybercrime. In order for cybercrime to be successful, 3 things have to take place. You have to gather data, you have to commit a crime, and then finally you have to cash that crime out. All 3 things have to work in conjunction. If they don't, the crime fails.
There's a ton here, and this is an awesome and wide-ranging conversation. I hope you enjoy it as much as I did. Hey, Brett, welcome to the How Did Happen podcast.
Thank you for bringing me on. I appreciate it.
I've been so excited to talk to you. So a couple things with Brett. I first heard Brett on the James Altucher podcast, which is something I listen to all the time. And I was struck by so many things that he had to say on that, his life, not just his life experiences, which we're going to learn all about, but so many unique things that he had to say on there that I was like, how do I get a hold of this guy? And so I went path of least resistance. I went to LinkedIn and sent him a note, and he didn't respond to my note. You know what he did? He called. Brett, you're the only person I've ever sent an intro on LinkedIn. And I do sometimes put my phone number if I really want to connect with somebody. You're the only person who's ever called me. So,
well, see, I like to be unique.
Yeah. Well, that says something about you because no one's ever done that. And I thought, holy crap, that's awesome. So a kudo for you, another kudo for you.
Thank you.
So listen, I'm going to tell you a little bit more about Brett so you can be as excited for this episode as I am. So Brett Johnson is former U.S. most wanted cyber criminal. Now he is a good guy. That's a self-described good guy. And I think you'll see why that moniker fits him so well. United States Secret Service called Brett the original Internet Godfather for his role in refining modern financial cybercrime. Or to put it another way, Brett was convicted of 39 felonies, placed on the U.S. most wanted list, escaped from prison, and he built the first organized cybercrime community called Shadow Crew. And a lot of you probably have never heard of Shadow Crew, but we're going to find out what Shadow Crew is and how it was the precursor to a lot of the dark web-ish things that you hear about today. So Brett was sentenced to 90 months in federal prison, and you'd think that might be the end of the story, but not hardly. He found redemption through his sister, his wife Michelle, and finally the FBI. He was given the chance to turn his life around, and he took it. Today, Brett is considered one of the leading authorities on cybercrime, identity theft, and cybersecurity on the planet. He works hard to protect businesses and consumers from the type of person he used to be, and he takes his job very seriously. He has been featured on or in Netflix, Hulu, Megyn Kelly, Lex Fridman, Concrete, Wired, New York Times, CNN, Fox News, and then every other outlet there is, I think, Brett. And he's worked with groups like the FBI, Microsoft, Capital One, American Express, TransUnion, Visa, some of the biggest names that you've heard of, and a bunch of others. He hosts a podcast called The Brett Johnson Show. If you're watching the video of this, you can see his podcast art behind him. And you can find out all about Brett at his website, which is www.anglerfish.com. So Brett, I ask everyone the same simple question to get started, and that is, how did it happen for you?
See, you got that loaded question right at the get-go, don't you?
Let's see where it goes.
How did it happen for me? A long line of bad choices. That I think that is probably the best response. Just a long line of bad choices, not just by me, but the adults that were around me when I was a child. The thing is I'm that's a damn good question that you asked. That really is. And you told me before I came on the show you were going to ask the question. I didn't put any thought into it because I didn't want to. I didn't want to prepare anything. I guess choices, those bad choices kind of define who I was and then ultimately who I became. You know, I'm from Eastern Kentucky, and my mom was a fraudster. And when I say she was a fraudster, I mean she was a fraudster. This is a woman who she steals a bulldozer at one point. She takes a slip and fall in a convenience store. She used to go to the drugstore, and she'd buy empty capsules, and then she'd buy diet pills and take the innards out of those diet pills and put in the empty capsules and sell it as speed to people. That was my mom, and she is an abusive person. She, my God, man, the things that this woman did to us as children. I remember my first memory, and I don't talk about this much. My first memory, I've got two. The first one is my dad was a helicopter pilot, a captain in the military, and my mom was just an LPN nurse. But we were in Fort Lewis, Washington. I was, Jesus was 70, 74, 75. So I would have been 4 or 5. My sister Denise would have been a year younger. They were driving on base, and me and Denise were in the back seat. My dad was driving. My mom was in the passenger seat. My mom was screaming at my dad. And this was common, hope you'd die. I don't know why I married, stuff like that. And my dad was always the calm person, Carolyn Sue, what's wrong? What did I do? Please stop, just like that. Just a very calm man overall. And I remember my mom, she lunged across the car, grabbed the steering wheel, looked at, I don't know if I guess she did look at it, but she grabbed the steering wheel, and I remember her screaming, "Are you ready to die, you son of a bitch?" and tried to steer us into traffic. And that's the first memory I've got, the first real solid memory. The other memory that I thought was a fake memory was my mom had a woman tied up in the front yard to a tree, and she was beating her. And for years, and I mean, I was in my 40s before I found out that was not a fake memory. That really happened. Those are the two earliest memories I've got in my life, and those are that's who my mom is. She was a person that always, everything around me and everything around the people that I've ever associated with, it seems like everything is kind of love kind of revolves around it all. Like my mom would always test people. Can I do this to you and you'll still love me? My dad was always scared of the people that he loved leaving. Me, I've always been the guy that's looking for love in all the wrong places. That's so it's like love revolves around everything. And when I said choices at the beginning, I look at my parents when I grew up. So my mom was the person who, she chose to cheat on my father. She chose to abuse me and my sister. And when I say abuse, I mean those two instances I just told you about, that's just the top of the cake, is all that is. But she chose to do that. She chose to constantly test people. She chose not to work, to commit crime, everything else. My father chose to let my mom abuse everyone in the family, and he never really put a stop to it. He became the enabler. He made those choices. The first crime I committed, and you people who've heard me talk before have heard me tell this story. The first crime I committed, my mom leaves my dad, and the way my mom left my dad, my great-grandfather had died. We were in Panama City, Florida. My great-grandfather had died, and my mom tells my dad and me and Denise, I was 10, my sister Denise was 9. She was like, "Oh, yeah, I'm going to go, and we're going to go to the funeral. I'm going to take the kids to the funeral up in Eastern Kentucky." That's the last time I saw my dad for years. I didn't know. I was 10. I didn't have a conversation with the man for another 20 years after that. And nobody knew that she was leaving my dad except for her. So she packed all of her clothes, didn't pack any of our clothes. We ended up moving in an apartment that my grandfather had built underneath of his main house. And that was a nightmare. She used to go out and party for days at a time. She'd leave me and Denise at the house. Like I said, I was 10. Denise was 9. My grandparents upstairs, they didn't want to feed us. My granddad, he was kind of nuts, kind of. He was nuts. But he would allow you to take a bath once a week, and the amount of water that you were allowed to put in the bathtub was an inch of water. That's what you were allowed to have. And he would come in and check on you to make sure you hadn't used any more water than that. So that was it. So the way my crimes began is mom had been gone for a few days, and I'm the kid that, I get the criminal mindset from my mom. My dad, I get that fear of the loved ones leaving me. So mom had always told me and my sister, hey, I gave up my life for you. I'm going to leave and not come back one of these days. You're going to find me in a ditch dead someplace. This is what my mom would say all the time. So I was the kid that when she would leave, I was always worried that, by God, she's not going to come back. We're going to find her dead. So I was always worried about that. And I'd post up at the window. I'd constantly be checking outside, stuff like that, to see if she's coming home. Denise was 9 years old. This child was 9 years old. And the only thing Denise was angry all the damn time. And even to this day, my sister is a great person, but even to this day, my sister has a lot of anger issues. So my mom had been gone for a few days. We didn't have any food in that apartment whatsoever. Denise comes in one day at 9 years old, and she's got this pack of pork chops in her hand. And I'm like, where did you get that? And she tells me she's stolen it. And I'm like, hey, show me how you've done that. So she takes me over and she shows me how she's stuffing food down her pants. And shit, you got to eat. So we start stealing food, and we get to the point where we're wanting a sandwich. And the thing is you can't stuff bread down your pants. So there was a Kmart across the way. I looked at Denise and I was like, let me see what I can do. And I walked in and got a hoodie off the rack, or a zip-up hoodie, took the tags off of it, put it on, wore it out, and got outside with it. And the way that you steal bread is you throw the hoodie over your shoulder. You stuff the bread down one of the sleeves. Then you put the hoodie over your shoulder and you just walk right out with it. And so that started our little shoplifting escapades. And we hit Kmart for, books, games, jewelry, music, all that stuff. Mom comes home and sees all the stuff we've stolen, and she's like, where did you find that? And 10 years old, you can't really make sense of things at 10 years old. I told my mom we found it. She's like, you didn't find that? Denise stands up, angry as ever. We stole it. My mom looks at my sister and show me how you did that. And she starts running me and Denise as little shoplifters, and goes and gets her mom to join us as well. And we used to take these road trips, and either me and Denise would steal things that she wanted us to steal, or we'd do the distraction. Who's going to, there's no way adults would steal anything with kids around. Yeah. Well, and so that's how my crimes begin. And I'm adamant, and I really do mean this. When you're a child, you can't help what the adults around you are doing. You're going to do what they're doing. All right. When I became an adult, I chose to commit crime. So I don't blame my childhood on my choices or my crimes when I became an adult. When I became an adult, that's all me. I had opportunities. I did. I had the ability. I'm not an idiot. I had the ability to lead a legal life. I just chose not to. My sister, for example, she had the exact same upbringing that I did, and she grows up to, other than that one shoplifting experience, she doesn't break the law anymore. She's got anger issues, but she grows up to be a good parent, a teacher, a really good person overall. And I'm the guy that just kept going. And I got to tell you, there's this thing I call the Eastern Kentucky mentality. And I don't think it's just, centralized in Eastern Kentucky, but in Eastern Kentucky, when you're raised in that environment, you believe, by God, it's the man's job to provide. It's the man's job to do this. It's the man's job to do that. And I guess I know that I have, got that in me. So with Denise, I think one of the reasons that she was able to avoid some of the things that I was doing was that she was not a male. She was a female, and I was expected to step up and do this stuff. And I did. So as I was growing up, I got involved in every type of scam and fraud that not only my mom, but every single member on that side of the family was committing. So I grew up knowing how to do insurance fraud, faking accidents, burning homes, faking stolen cars, charity fraud, forging documents, trafficking drugs, growing drugs, illegally strip mining coal. I mean, I grew up knowing how to do every single aspect of that. And at the same time, I grew up being a really good social engineer, because as a child, because of that environment, I had to know what the adults in my circle were thinking. And I had to be able to navigate and survive that. So that's one of the tools that I acquired as a child, was being the social engineer of being able to read people quickly and being able to know what their triggers are and trying to manipulate people. And it was because of the adults in my circle. And it was also because of the crimes that I was involved in. That was my childhood. I branched off. I said that I had opportunities, and I did. I'm an extremely good actor, stage actor. And coming out of high school, I met my first really decent human being when I was 16. And before I get to that, I just want people to, I talked about the abuse. It got so bad. I got to the point where I would catch my mom and dad gone, and I would urinate on the floor. Now, we had dogs, so they would think it was the dog that was doing that. I didn't talk about that until in my 40s, until I had gotten out of prison and I was on stage. And I told myself, I'd made a deal with myself that anytime I was speaking, that I was going to try to find out something new about myself, try to become better. And I started talking.
When you say something new about yourself, you mean go somewhere where you haven't gone before,
Yeah,
Brett? Or
yeah.
okay.
I always want to. The first few times I spoke, and I'm a career speaker now. Yeah, so I'm a public speaker, keynote, and everything else. But the first few times I spoke, I was keeping things hidden in, not getting things out. And about the fourth time on stage, before I got on stage, I was like, you're going to be doing this shit for the rest of your life. If you're going to do it, be truthful, not only to them, but to yourself, and try to find out something new about you every single time that you talk to people. So I got up there and I started to talk about it, and it just came out. It just started pouring out about, when I was a child, it got to the point where I would just urinate on the floor, and I didn't know. And even when I was saying it, I didn't know why I had done that. And the interesting thing is after I said that, this woman comes up to me after the presentation. And she was a fraud analyst, but she tells me that before she became a fraud analyst, that she used to work with abused children, and that was normal, that it got with a lot of children, that got to be the only form of control that they had, was that they could control when they used the bathroom. That's
when
the first.
When and where.
Yeah, when and where.
Okay.
Nobody can tell you where to do it. You can. So that's the only form of control you've got left after a while, is that. So that happened, and then it got to the point where my mom leaves my dad, and I was 15. My dad, I used to call my dad all the time. He would, and he was in Panama City, Florida. Me and Denise were in Hazard, Kentucky. I was under the impression that I was going to be living with my dad, and I called him one Sunday. And he tells me he'd either gotten married or he was getting ready to get married. And anyway, I was not going down there to live with it. That was over. And I don't remember a whole lot, but I know that I went to I used to go out to the payphones at the hospital to call the man. And so I got off the phone. I walked into an elevator, and a woman walked in the elevator with me, and she looked very similar to my mom. And I assaulted the lady. I ended up beating the lady up, and it was brutal. It was brutal.
And that was because she reminded you of.
And here's the thing. Now, I want you to know that I can rationalize. I'm 53 right now, and I can rationalize why that happened. Okay, I know why, psychologically why that happened. All right, but I got to tell you, that doesn't matter a damn thing. It doesn't. It doesn't matter a damn thing. At the end of the day, I did that. And I have, it took me to where I was in my 40s before I could really even talk about that. It's every day I think about that. This is what I did. Yeah, I can talk about it being a product of abuse and everything else, but it doesn't matter. To me, it doesn't matter. I still did that. I didn't, that was when I was 15. I served 6 months in a county jail, in solitary in a county jail at 15. Finally, I go to court. Judge finds me guilty of assault. He sentences me to a psychological evaluation. So I spent 6 weeks at a mental hospital in Louisville, Kentucky, and they cut me loose. And I was supposed to go to counseling. But the thing is that you're in Eastern Kentucky. Back then, you didn't have counseling. So there was no counseling. I ended up having to switch schools a few times because it's a small area and everyone knew what you'd done. When I was 16 or 17, I met my first really decent human being. I had, in the county, there were 3 schools. I went to the first school, and the children wouldn't let me at the door. That was a high school. The children would not let me in the door. They stopped me. The teachers didn't. They told me and my mom, "You're not welcome here."
Because they knew about this
Yeah.
incident.
Yeah. Then I went to the second school, and the principal told my mom that my sister was welcome to attend, but that I wasn't. And my mom was raising hell about that. And I told my mom, I was like, "Look, just take me to this other school was way the hell out of the country." And I was like, "Just take me to this other school. I'll be fine. Just take me over there." So she agreed to do that. And that other school its name was Dills Combs, and they accepted me kind of with open arms. They didn't hesitate to take me in at all. They knew who I was. But that first day I walked into my homeroom, and I handed the teacher there. Her name was Carol Combs. I handed the teacher there my school, my class schedule, and she tells me today. She said, "I heard that voice that you've got, and I knew that you were destined for something." And she wanted me to be in theater, in drama, and I told her no. I wanted it to be in academics. So the deal was that I could participate in academics as long as I also participated in theater. So she was the first decent person I met in my life, and she became kind of like a foster mom to me while I was in those final 2 years of high school. And I excelled. I really did. I became head of the academic team. I head of the mock trial department. I was one of the top students in the state. I won for the state. I won best actor and actress in the state. I think the only person to ever do that in the state of Kentucky. But got out of college and had scholarships and just a lot of opportunity. That's what I said earlier. I had opportunities. About the same time, I found a girlfriend. And those poor choices, it all boils down to choices. Those poor choices. I chose the relationship with this girl over taking one of those scholarships. So I went to community college. The plan was to go there, 2 years and then transfer out. And while I was at community college, there hired a fairly well-known theater director. And he put on a play that was written by the head of the theater department at San Jose State, a guy by the name of Edward F. Emanuel. His claim to fame was he wrote the movie Three Ninjas. So Edward agreed to fly into Hazard, Kentucky to see his play. And Edward's watching the show, and the show was called A House Divided. And I played like 30 different characters in the show. And he watches the show. As soon as the show's over, he looks at me. He's like, "I'll give you a full ride scholarship if you want to come to San Jose State and get in theater." And I looked at him. I was like, "Let's do that." He's like, "I'll be back in 2 weeks." So he leaves. A couple of weeks later, he flies in. A couple of weeks later, I'm outside shooting basketball with some friends of mine. He pulls up, and I walk over to his car, and I'm like, "Hey, I'll walk you in and introduce you to my mom." He's like, "No, man, I got it." I'm like, "Okay." So I keep shooting ball. He walks into where my mom is, and he's in there about 15 minutes. Walks out, white as a sheet. Never says a word to me, gets in the car, leaves, and I don't hear from the man again. And it took me a few weeks to find out what had went on, and what went on is he gets in there. My mom she pulls a knife on him, and she tells him, "You're not going to steal my son from me. I'll cut you from, gizzard to asshole." And that scares a man to death. And I guess that kind of broke my spirit on that. I just kind of gave up I was an adult at that point. I mean, I didn't have to, but I guess it just kind of squashed it for me. So I just started doing more fraud and scams and whatnot. I faked a car accident to get the money to get married, to finance that. My first girlfriend, she broke up with me. She was a preacher's daughter. She was an outstanding young lady, and I was not an outstanding young man. And she finally, after 5 years, realized that, and she broke up with me. And then I met this other girl almost immediately, and I was married to her within 6 months after that, and financed the marriage by faking a car accident and getting the insurance money. Moved up to Lexington, Kentucky to go to university. And again, I'm that guy that gets the worst parts from mom and dad. From dad, that fear of being abandoned. I've never been able to show love in some sort of healthy way. Ever. Even today, I've been married to my wife now since 2014, and I've known her for over a decade. But I'm still learning what it is to be healthy in a relationship. Still have problems. She'll tell you she loves me to death, but she'll tell you I still have issues. And
Can I ask you a couple of questions?
Sure, go ahead.
Your mom, did you this and tell you don't have to tell me if you don't want
No,
to.
I'll say.
Did you have you ever felt loved by your mom?
I think that's one of the problems that I have in relationships. My mom loves me and my sister in her way, and in her way means that we're property. And she always did that. You are my children. You belong to me. And if we ever stepped outside of that, we suffered the consequences. For example, my sister, she gets a scholarship. We're both bright children. She gets a scholarship to Berea College, one of the best colleges in the United States. She goes there. It's a free college, so she didn't have to pay anything. You work your way through. She goes there. My mom finds out that my sister has a boyfriend. And my mom gets in the car, drives up to Berea, goes in the president's office, and proceeds to tell the president that my sister is addicted to drugs, that she's a prostitute, and that her boyfriend is not her boyfriend, but her boyfriend's her pimp. All complete lies, just to try to get Denise thrown out of school, and almost does, because my mom's a very good social engineer too. So she almost gets Denise thrown out, and the only thing that saves Denise is a couple of alumni members knew who my mom was, and they were friends of Denise. Their daughter was friends with Denise, so they tell the president, hey, this woman's nuts. The president calls my mom, and my mom cracks and starts just cussing him out, threatening to kill him, everything else. And that's what saved Denise from being thrown out of school. And these types of things were common. Feeling loved, that's a difficult thing to say.
Okay.
Because it's sometimes it's hard to define what love is. You know it. I know that it's unhealthy. Okay. But I think that my mom loves me and my sister in a very, very toxic way, in a very abusive way, is what I think.
Okay. Fair enough. It reminded me, when you've been talking about social engineering a couple times, you're a good social engineer. She's a good social engineer. I recently read the book called The Sociopath Next Door. And sociopaths are very good social engineers. They can make you feel what they want to make you feel, even though they don't feel it at all, because they're really incapable of love. But they know that to get someplace in life, you have to be able to convince people that you care about them.
I mean, you're right. And, I've been, I'll tell you, there was, when I first started, made the choice to turn my life around and stop breaking the law. There were people, Neil O'Farrell, he was the head of the Identity Theft Council. And he was one of the first people that really helped me. And he had, some people had talked to him, and he's like, well, now you got to watch out for Brett. He's a sociopath. And I took exception to that. And I still take exception to that to a degree of, hey, and I do believe this. I think that real sociopaths are very rare. I think that's a term that's bandied about a bit too much. It's not that I didn't care about my victims or didn't know that I was doing wrong. I did. All right. It's just that if you look at, I've been very fortunate on this legal side of things that I spend a lot of time thinking and reading and talking to people about this stuff. Mm-hmm. And on the ACFE, the American Certified Fraud Examiners Association, they have this thing called the Creasy Fraud Triangle that defines what insider fraud is, why it happens. And Creasy says it's three things: that you have to have pressure, that employee has to have pressure coming from someplace, maybe loss of a job, something like that. They have to have opportunity. They have to have the ability and the opportunity to commit the crime, but they also have to be able to justify it. They have to be able to convince themselves that, hey, what I'm doing is okay. I'm really a good person. And I don't think a sociopath does that. And with me, I was always the guy that justified every single thing that I did. I said I did it for my family, for my wife, for my sister, for my stripper girlfriend. I remember when before I went on the run, I'd been screwing over the Secret Service. But before I went on the run, I talked to a guy named Tom Zeller. He was a writer for the New York Times, and he flew down to interview me. I had talked to him for about 3 or 4 hours that day. And as I was leaving, I guess he knew I was about to go on the run. He was like, Brett, can I ask you one more question? I was like, yeah. He's like, why did you do it? And I looked at him. I was dead serious. And I was like, I did it all for Elizabeth. And he looked at me and he's like, and his exact words, excuse the language, but his exact words were, God damn it, Brett, at some point, you've got to accept responsibility. Mm-hmm. And I had no clue. I mean, not a clue what that guy was talking about, because at that point, I believed that I did it all for her. That was the stripper girlfriend. And if it hadn't been the stripper girlfriend, it would have been, I did it all for my family, for my wife, for all that.
Yeah.
So I think the justification really matters when we're talking about, I don't think a sociopath and certainly not a psychopath would ever try to justify their crimes. And, I spent 7.5 years in prison. And during that 7.5, I may have met 2 real sociopaths or psychopaths. The rest of everybody there, they made bad choices.
They made bad choices. Yeah. The author in that book says that she disagrees a little bit with you. She says that 1 in 25 people are sociopaths, believe it or not, which seems like a crazy, crazy number.
It's a high number of people.
But as you were talking about doing it for Elizabeth was her name, the stripper?
Right.
When sociopaths get caught, it's that Elizabeth was doing it to them. So they become the victim.
No, I was never the victim.
Yeah. So I think that's a clear delineator, because you've said a number of times that you've made deliberate choices and you were doing. I think those kind of people say, no, it wasn't my choice. It was because of my mom, or it was because of Elizabeth, or it was because of the Secret Service or whomever. And they sort of insulate themselves in that because they can't handle the truth.
Well, I've not read the book that you're talking about, but I will tell you that if you were ever to talk to my mom, you will hear that a lot.
Yeah.
I'm not the one to blame. They are. So that there may be a lot of truth to that. I'll have to read through that book. But that was my upbringing and everything that happened from there, and my cyber crimes. Because I guess that's the reason I'm able to do what I do today is this whole cybercrime thing. Yeah. Faked that car accident to get the money to get married. And I was in Lexington and I was doing these little scams and frauds. And
can before you go, Can I ask you, how do you fake a car accident and get a claim? Like what, because I think people are thinking, well, how would I do that?
Well, first, you got to realize I'm from Eastern Kentucky, so
that's been established many times.
All right, you got to realize that, because this story's nuts. Okay. I had a Chevy. I think it was a Sprint. It was a 4-door, very small sedan, about the size of a Ford Escort at the time. Yeah. All right, and I had bought it at a car auction for like $1,000, and I bought it with the idea that I was going to fake that car accident. And what I was going to do, we had insurance through USAA, and they had this thing where they would pay you lost wages. Well, my aunt owned an LLC. She was a fraudster too. And she was like, hey, what you can do, she said, I did this too. What you can do is you can do an accident. You don't have to go to a real doctor. You can go to a chiropractor. The chiropractor will sign off that you're injured and everything. USAA will pay you $800 a week for lost wages. And I'm sitting there going, $800 a week? This is, 94, $800 a week. I can do that. That'll finance my marriage. So I tell her I'm going to do this. My first cousin, Ronnie, he hears that I'm going to do it. And he comes up to me. He's like, hey, man, can I ride with you? And I was like, yeah, let's do that. So he's like, give me a few hours. So what he does is during that space of time, he goes to a dentist and has one of his molars pulled so that he can say it was knocked out during the car accident. So he comes up, he's got blood on his shirt and everything else. I'm like, man, what have you friggin' done? He's like, that's why I can get paid. He said, you ought to do it too. I was like, dude, I'm not having teeth pulled out. So my mom was living up in the head of a hollow at this point. I was staying with my grandmom. She was living up in the head of a hollow. We drove up to visit her. All right. In this place called Bull Creek, Kentucky. So we drive up to visit her. My stepdad, because we never went up there to visit, he was suspicious out of the gate. He was like, what the hell's going on? So we stayed there a few hours. And the idea was, as we were coming back out of the hollow, winding mountain road, dirt road, we would say we lost control. Maybe a car was, that's what we ended up saying. A car was coming at us and we veered off to the side of the road and just went over the edge. So here we are. We find a place where we want to dump the car. We go to push it over and the damn thing doesn't go like 5 feet over the edge. So here we are, we end up getting down there in the side of it and rolling it the rest of the way down the hill. Then we cover ourselves with leaves and dirt and mud and everything, climb out, walk out of the hollow, find us a store, call the police, and it goes from there.
Okay.
And that was what happened was that, and that financed my marriage. And of course, USAA, they let it go on for about a year and a half, until one day I was in Lexington, Kentucky. I was going to university, and I've never told that story before, but I was in Lexington, Kentucky, and I stopped going to the chiropractor, and I started photocopying his little reports, and I would sign his John Henry to him and sent them into USAA. So one morning I get this knock at the door, and it's an investigator for USAA. And my wife, Susan, she didn't know what the hell I was doing. So he's like, "Can I come in and talk to you?" And so he lays out all the forged reports that I've put down. He's like, "I've talked to the chiropractor. You've not been to the chiropractor in 8 months." He's laying it all out. I'm like, "Okay." And I was like, "So what's going to go on?" He's like, "Well, you're going to sign this paper. You're going to stop being a member of USAA. We're going to stop paying you. And because you're going to agree to do this, we're not going to prosecute." And I'm like, sounds like a fair idea to me. So that was how I got my marriage financed. I got a job after that. I'd been working at Lexmark, and I was doing like 60 hours a week at Lexmark. I'm a bit of a control freak. So I told my wife, I'll do all the cooking and cleaning and everything else. You just worry about going to school. And I couldn't do it all. I had 18-hour class load and everything else. And the job is what gave. And I started doing more and more scams and frauds. I got a job at some telemarketing companies so I could go in and steal their phone list and the products that they were selling. Got in some trouble over that, set up my own charity at one point, a Kiwanis Club in my own name, so I could rip people off on that. Got in trouble over that, served like 3 months in a county jail for that one. Then when I got out of that is when I went into internet crime. Got a desktop computer, didn't really know how to make money, found eBay, liked eBay a lot. It's right when eBay had transitioned from selling Pez dispensers over to the auction stuff. And
Okay.
I was like, man, there's got to be a way to make money on this. And didn't really know how until I used to watch Inside Edition all the time. And back then, Bill O'Reilly was the host. And this one episode, they were profiling Beanie Babies, and they were profiling Peanut the Royal Blue Elephant. The little guy was selling for $1,500. And I was naive. I was sitting there going, well, shit, I'm in Kentucky. A lot of people probably don't even know that. I can probably find a Hallmark store that's got a peanut in a bin someplace. So I skipped class the next day, start shopping around all the stores. Takes me about 3 hours to figure out, no, idiot, he's on eBay for $1,500. But they did have these little gray Beanie Baby ones that looked exactly alike, except the color was different. So here I am. I'm like, buy a gray Beanie Baby elephant for $8. Stop by Kroger on the way home, pick up a pack of blue Rit dye, go home, try to dye the little guy. Turns out they're made out of polyester. They don't hold dye very well. Get them out of the bath, look like they've got the mange. And that story, I ended up ripping a lady off of $1,500. Found a picture of a real one online, posted it. She thought I had the real thing. She wins the bid. And when she wins the bid is when that social engineering kicks in. I don't want to be on the defensive. I want her on the defensive. Mm-hmm. So I sent her a message. I was like, hey, congratulations, you win the bid. Thank you so much. By the way, we've never done any business before. I don't even know if I can trust you. What I need you to do is pick up a postal money order from USPS. It's issued by the United States government, protects you, protects me. Send me that. As soon as I get it, I'll cash it out, send you your animal. She believed that. She sends me the money orders for $1,500. I cash them, send her the animal, get a phone call. I didn't order this. My response, lady, you ordered a blue elephant. I sent you a bluish elephant. And the interesting thing is that one story is kind of a microcosm of really every type of scam or fraud that you encounter online. The first lesson that I learned from that is, hey, if you delay a victim long enough, a lot of them get so exasperated, they throw their hands in the air, walk away. You don't hear from them again, and they don't complain to law enforcement. And that is still one of the first lessons that cyber criminals learn today. But it goes further than that. If you think about a lot of the scams that take place today, whether it be PlayStation 5s or cryptocurrency or anything else like that, you've got something that potential victim wants. That desire for that merchandise, that item, is such that it allows me as a predator to come in and more easily gain trust with that potential victim. to manipulate that victim.
Mm-hmm.
At the same time, trust online, the way that that's established is pretty weird. Trust online is established through technology, tools, social engineering. So for some reason, we inherently trust the technology. We trust our cell phones, our desktops. We trust the websites we go to. We trust the software that we use. Even though we don't understand it, we trust it. That's why we have trouble with fake news. That's why, people can use tools like spoofed phone numbers or SOX5 proxies to spoof their location and their phone numbers. All this stuff is very easy to build trust because people just inherently kind of trust what they don't understand.
They want to trust. It's just
they want to trust. We as human beings want to trust, right?
Yeah.
And that lays a base level of trust. Then once that door is open, you see how good of a social engineer someone is in manipulating someone to give them information, access, data, or cash. So that's really that Beanie Baby story is really kind of a microcosm of the way most frauds happen. You can substitute any type of crypto token you want to into that story, and that will work out just fine. You can substitute those PlayStation 5s that people were getting ripped off on a year and a half ago, and that works just fine. No matter what the item is, that story is kind of a microcosm for that. The problem is that we as human beings, we want to trust people. We just don't verify things the way that we should. We think that, we sign on to dating sites, and our desire to have that relationship or friendship is such that it allows a predator, like I used to be, to come in and get someone to set reason and logic to the side and react emotionally. Because if I can get you to react emotionally, I'm going to get you. And that's always what you're looking for from the predator point of view, to put reason, logic to the side and then go from there. So that was the first online crime that I committed. I did it under my own name, got away with it, and kept going. And I got better at understanding the ways or the dynamics of cybercrime. Got to where I was selling pirated software. Pirated software led into mod chips. So you would solder a chip onto a circuit board of maybe a gaming system so you could play the pirated software, pirated games, or a cable box so that you could watch all the pay-per-view channels. And then finally, I started to program satellite DSS cards, those 18-inch RCA satellite systems. You can take the access card out, program it, turn on all the channels, all the pay-per-view. Started doing that at almost the exact same time that the Canadian government ruled that it was legal to pirate those signals. A Canadian judge actually said in court that since RCA didn't sell the systems, that his citizens could pirate those signals. And what happened is he was a complete idiot. But what happens is overnight in the United States, little industry pops up. You go down to Best Buy, buy the system for $100, take it out in the parking lot, open it up, pull the system out, pull the card out, throw the system away, program the card, ship it to Canada, $500 a pop. Started doing that, making a lot of money, had so many orders, could not fill them all, and quickly, and I do mean quickly, thought to myself, why do I need to fill any of the orders? They're in Canada. I'm down here. Who are they going to complain to? It's illegal. So I didn't fill any of the orders, stole even more money. At that point, I was stealing it's between $4,000 and $6,000 a week, and got worried about how much money was coming in. Thought I was going to be looked at for money laundering. I figured the best thing that I could do is get a fake driver's license, use that to open up a bank account, launder the money through the account, pull the cash out of the ATMs. Didn't know where to get a fake ID, and just got online, started to look around, and thought I found a guy, sent him $200, sent the guy my picture, and he rips me off. And,
he did exactly what you
he did
doing,
exactly
did
that.
right
Yeah.
Okay.
And here's one of the takeaways from this. One of the things that you find fraudsters are all organized these days online. But fraudsters, a lot of us get ripped off a lot, and we tend to chalk it up just as the cost of business. But a lot of us lose a lot of money just on scammers that are out there. A guy rips me off, and I get pissed because, hey, I need this ID. And the result of that was this thing called shadow crew. So cybercrime. In order for cybercrime to be successful, three things have to take place. You have to gather data, you have to commit a crime, and then finally, you have to cash that crime out. All three things have to work in conjunction. If they don't, the crime fails. The problem, and it's a huge problem, the problem is that one criminal can't do all three things. He's good at one thing, sometimes two, but he can't do all three. So you have to rely on other people who are good in those areas where you are not. Now, before Shadow Crew, and that's why it's never a single attacker which victimizes you or your company, by the way. Before Shadow Crew, you couldn't really network with other criminals. The only avenue you had to talk to other criminals was this thing called IRC, Internet Relay Chat, this rolling chat board where you had no idea who you were talking to, if the person knew what they were talking about, if they had a product or service, if they had it, if it worked, or if they were just going to rip you off because everyone there was a crook. Shadow Crew solved that. Shadow Crew gave a trust mechanism that criminals could use. Now you had this large communication channel, this forum type structure where individuals from different time zones could reference conversations days, weeks, months old. They could take part in those conversations, learn from those conversations, ask questions. You knew by looking at someone's screen name what the skill level of that person was, what they did, if you could trust them, if you could learn, network, work with them, what have you. We had vouching systems in place, review systems in place, escrow systems in place, all with a singular purpose of establishing trust with one criminal and another when they would never meet each other, not know each other's real name, not even know what each other look like. That was the primary, what I say is the most important thing that happened with Shadow Crew. Now, Shadow Crew was also the first marketplace of criminal goods online, and we dealt with basically everything. Most of it was financial cybercrime, identity information, but we also trafficked in drugs at one point, counterfeit currencies, stuff like that. The only thing we did not traffic in, we trafficked in weapons as well. The only thing we did not engage in was child pornography. Everything else was open menu at that point.
So let me just
Sure.
let me just try to layman this. This sounds like it's a marketplace of trust for the trustless.
Right.
So it's not, so the idea is we're not just going to do one score and then, hide somewhere. We're going to take each other's unique abilities and we're going to create something where we work together over and over.
Right.
And we do it in such a way where our talents are maximized, but our identities are still kept separate. So we're not sort of, do I have that right?
You do. If you think it's a pretty neat concept, if you think about it. And it was so successful. I was the guy who built that trust mechanism. And that mechanism is still what is used today in online criminal environments. That's how you establish trust with one person and another, is that whole system of things that's there. And it's necessary. I mean, it's one of these things, if you're dealing with a criminal, and most criminals are motivated by cash, they're looking to steal currency. If you're not able to trust that individual, then that means that any person can come in and victimize you, and you're not going to be successful. So that was one of the things that we did there. Shadow Crew was the first. They call it the eBay of cybercrime. It was a marketplace. I don't like the word eBay because it was a little bit different, but you had that going on there as well. And also the other big takeaway from Shadow Crew, when it was built, we were open source. We did not believe in keeping information away from other members. Everything was discussed publicly, and we shared information across the board. That today is still in play, and that today is really the reason that you see all these verticals, merchants, retailers, infrastructure, everything else. That's why you see financial institutions, what have you. That's why you see them playing a game of catch up. It's not that they are proactive, it's that they are reactive to what the bad guys are doing. And the reason for that is they don't communicate with each other. They don't share information. Now, there's privacy concerns, there's regulations that stop that as well, but there's also competitive edges. So you'll have one company in a vertical that they're getting hit with some sort of fraud or cybercrime, and they won't share that information, any of that information at all, with other companies in that, or competitors in that same vertical, with the hope that, hey, we'll put security in and it'll be the good neighbor policy. We'll send them to our neighbors down the street where they can hit them instead. So you see that a lot. And because of that, it tends to be that the good guys are reactive when it comes to cybercrime. It's very hard to take a proactive stance if no one is on the same page. We understood when Shadow Crew was built that by educating everyone equally across the board, everyone becomes better educated and more profitable at the end of the day. And that's still the way it is today. You still see that type of mindset in play, where the good guys have still not quite gotten there.
What can the good guys do it? How do It seems like a simple thing. If you're as organized as they are, the likelihood that you'll get ripped off is declines, and that benefits everybody. So why
Well,
not?
we are seeing some headway. For
Okay.
example, banks have passed legislation where they can communicate with each other. Now they have to strip the PII that's out of that, but they can communicate, and banks tend to be fairly decent about communicating with each other as well. All right, but a lot of the other verticals, merchants, retailers, infrastructure, things like that, you don't really see that. Fintech, crypto, all that, you don't really see that communication that's going on. And
Okay.
again, you've got privacy concerns, regulations, but a lot of it is the competitive edges that are kind of weeding that stuff out. And it's not just communicating with companies outside of you, it's also the communication inside or within the companies themselves. A lot of the times you'll see customer service. The fraud department doesn't want to hear from customer service. The engineering department doesn't want to hear from the fraud department. So you see these closed circles in companies that don't communicate with each other. Management doesn't want to hear from anybody. They know everything. So you see this culture of just not sharing or being open across the board. And that really benefits nobody but the criminals that are out there. And it benefits them greatly. I mean, really greatly.
I can see that. Yeah, for sure. Hey, everybody. Thanks for listening to the show. And before you go, I just have 3 requests for you. 1, if you like what I'm doing, please consider subscribing or following the podcast on whatever podcast platform you prefer. If you're really into it, leave me a review, write something nice about me, give me 5 stars or whatever you feel is most appropriate. Number 2, I've got a book. It's called Ownership: How Getting Selfish Got Me Unstuck. It's an Amazon bestseller. And I'd love for you to read it or listen to it on Audible or wherever else, Barnes & Noble, Amazon. You can get it everywhere. If you're looking for inspiration that will help you unlock your greatness and potential, order or download it today so that you can have your very own copy. And if you get it, please let me know what you think. Number 3, my newsletter. I do a newsletter every Thursday, and I talk about things that are interesting to me or I give more information about the podcast and the podcast guests that I've had and the experiences that I've had with them. You can sign up for the podcast today at my website, which is my name, MikeMalatesta.com. You do that right now, put in your email address, and you'll get the very next issue. The newsletter is short, thoughtful, and designed to inspire, activate, and maximize the greatness in you.